Mitchell's Childhood Memories, Part 14. Welcome, everyone. In previous episodes, I've described my beautiful childhood growing up in Brooklyn, New York. And today I'm going to be a little bit different. I'm going to talk about what was going through the mind of this child, Mitchell, during those formative years of my life. As just to remind you, I had an amazing childhood. I was very, very blessed to have such a mother and father like I have. They were, my mom would read me books before every night before I went to sleep. If she didn't read me books, she would tell me stories and she would tell me history and she would inspire me. And my mom and dad, they gave me a rich upbringing. They took me to picnics and they took me to the beach and they took me to museums and they took me to the planetarium and they took me to the cinema and they took me out into the countryside and it was just complete. It was just really, really, really wonderful. But interestingly, a little child sometimes knows things that the parents think they don't know. I sometimes overheard discussions between my mom and dad, or maybe they let something slip out. And I realized that they were concerned about me when I was a little child. They found me to be, I don't know, unusual or maybe not abnormal, different. And this confused me because I really do. What was I doing wrong? What was concerning them? What was the problem? And thinking about it, I don't know obviously everything, but certain things which I saw was number one that when I learned to walk, I had a I walked funny when I was very, very young. In fact, I continued that my gait of walking was unusual, so I stood out that way. That was one thing. Another thing was that I was very accident prone. I uh, I once fell off the monkey bars and hurt myself very badly. Another time, I walked right into a swing and hit my head and got a concussion. So my parents noticed that at times I was very much lost in my own thoughts. At times I was lost in my own world, not very conscious of my surroundings. Uh, Another thing was very often my mom and dad would call me or would say, come to dinner or we're going shopping, or they'd ask me a question and I just wouldn't respond because I was just inside my own head. I was just somewhere else and they couldn't understand. Um, Another thing, I was very, very shy as a youngster and very, very protective of my own space. I was very good in athletics and I played with the boys, for hours and hours. But when I came home, I preferred to be alone, be with my toys, be with myself. Where other children went on play dates, one go to one house, one go to the other house. But I was just content to be alone and be with my own self, and I was very, very happy about it. Another thing was I was very, very shy as a young boy. I usually stayed in the background. I didn't speak very, very much in social situations. And finally, I would say at times, I was very, very stubborn. I was a very stubborn boy. And so my mom wanted me go shopping with her. I didn't want to go. She wouldn't back down. I wouldn't back down. There was a clash. I mean, I wasn't stubborn all the time, but sometimes you know, I was very stubborn. I admit it, and all this was causing them concern. Uh, but from my vantage point, that all these things, well, that's who I was. That's how I was at that particular time. In some respects, that's how I am still now. People who know me will know that sometimes I'm sociable, but sometimes I'm just very quiet, and sometimes I get lost in my thoughts. Sometimes I get lost in a place maybe where there aren't any thoughts. And by the way, that's a very, very pleasant place place to be in. But that's my nature, and that's my nature of who I am. But I think there's like an explanation for you could say, my abnormal behavior of my childhood. There were certain things that I was experiencing as a little boy that perhaps was unusual and different than other children, or maybe not, but this was my experience. So I'd just like to run through them. Number one, as a young child, I could see myself looking back and seeing myself born, remembering how it was to be born the day of my birth in the hospital. And I remember gazing around and the first view of looking around and seeing this world. Now that sounds very unusual, maybe crazy, or scientists would say it's impossible, but that was my experience. Somehow I remembered. Then another story. When I was born, I had a great grandfather, and I don't remember his name, but he was everyone called him Papa. Now Papa, everyone said, loved me so much when I was born, and he showered me with love. And unfortunately, he died when I was about 2 years old, so I don't really remember him so much from the world. But I do remember that Papa kept on coming to me as I was 2 or 3 or 4 years old, in dreams or sometimes in visions. He was like, when I was very young, he was almost always present. I remember his big face smiling at me. Sometimes Papa would speak beautiful words, or sometimes he would hug me. But he was really a support for me in my early childhood. But how could I express this as a little child? You can't, there's no one to the adult world. This is just crazy. So these are things that were just going on inside of me. And I also had a vision that continually repeated itself as I was a little child, in my early youth. And the vision went something like this. I noticed in the distance this very, very beautiful place, and it was like magical, and I wanted to go there. When I got so close, it was something like paradise. It was like love, complete love and complete joy and complete bliss, and it was everything was just perfect, and there was no pain. I so much wanted to be there, and I was stopped. There was like invisible barrier, and I couldn't reach that place. And somehow I couldn't get there. That frustrated me throughout my childhood, that I had that experience. I was a child. I loved another thing. I loved playing with my toys, especially my building blocks. And I get lost in that. I build cities of the future, and I build imaginary cities, and I would build like a space station on Mars, and then my mom would be calling me for dinner. I don't want to go for dinner or go for shopping when I'm so lost in my amazing projects. So these are some reasons why I was doing what I was doing. Again, I was a child when I was in the Catskill Mountains. I would go into the forest and remember how I would watch frogs for hours. I would dance on the rocks in the stream as the sun was breaking through, as the wind was blowing, and I was lost in this. I discovered a oneness, a unity, and I became part of that. And I was like in a bliss. I was like in such a fantastic place, spinning in infinity. So this is the states that I was going through as a little child. And so I was a child that was filled with creativity and imagination and dreams and joy. And I think most children are filled with that. Maybe all children are filled with that. And it's too bad that sometimes these are suffocated when they really should be supported by the parents. Because we really should take our inner child and take us with us into this adult world. Because our parents want us to be successful, but the best way to be successful is to have that inner child with us. And that creativity and that imagination, that will make us a great life. Yes, I was a different person. I admit I was different. But viva la difference. Difference is good. Actually, difference is my superpower. Thank you, everyone.